The restaurant was quiet in the late afternoon, with sunlight streaming through tall windows and casting warm patterns across the polished wooden floor. It was the kind of place where the staff moved gracefully, balancing plates and glasses, serving dishes with practiced precision. Every detail, from the sparkling cutlery to the carefully arranged flowers on the tables, suggested elegance and wealth. People came here expecting refinement, and most of the patrons reflected that expectation. They dressed neatly, spoke softly, and kept their gestures polite. Yet, there was one man who seemed to carry a different energy entirely. He arrived with an air of superiority, dressed in a tailored suit that shimmered slightly under the sunlight. He walked with confidence, as though the entire restaurant existed to accommodate him alone. There was a noticeable smirk on his face, one that spoke of self-assurance and perhaps a little arrogance. He chose a table in the corner where he could observe the entire room without being noticed too much, but still have the power to watch anyone who walked past. From the moment he sat down, he scanned the room, his gaze sharp and calculating. The waitstaff moved quickly around him, and he seemed to take quiet satisfaction in their hustle, perhaps assuming that service was owed to him more than to anyone else. He did not speak at first, simply observed, tapping a finger lightly on the table, occasionally glancing at the menu without much interest. It seemed he had already made up his mind about the place and the people within it. Among the staff, there was one young woman who stood out not because she tried to, but because she carried herself with a quiet grace. She moved from table to table, serving dishes with calm efficiency, always careful not to disturb the guests more than necessary. There was a warmth in her smile, though it was subtle, and her eyes seemed to hold stories that most people did not notice. She was not flashy. Her uniform was neat but simple, her hair tied back to keep it from falling over her face as she worked. She seemed ordinary at first glance, but there was something in the way she moved, the small attentions she gave to each guest, that suggested a depth and dedication beyond the surface. The man noticed her immediately, though he did not approach her. He watched from across the room as she placed a dish in front of a guest, nodding politely, and then moved on to the next table. His eyes followed her steps, a slight laugh escaping his lips when he saw her glance at the piano in the corner of the room. It was a small, elegant piano, untouched by most guests, a fixture more decorative than functional in the eyes of the casual observer. But the waitress looked at it with a momentary sparkle in her eyes, a look that suggested familiarity, perhaps even love for the instrument. The man chuckled quietly to himself. He shook his head, as though finding the idea amusing. In his mind, he thought she was just a waitress, and she would never be more than that. The notion that someone like her could do anything remarkable seemed impossible to him, and he found the thought humorous. Yet he could not entirely look away. There was a curiosity, though buried under his pride, that made him watch her closely. She continued her work, moving from table to table, refilling water glasses, asking politely if the guests needed anything else. There was a rhythm to her movements, a kind of silent music in the way she carried herself. Her presence had a subtle influence on the atmosphere of the restaurant. People seemed more at ease around her, smiling when she approached, laughing lightly at her quiet jokes, responding warmly to her simple gestures. It was a contrast to the man, whose presence seemed heavy, commanding attention even when he wanted to be unnoticed. He continued to sip his drink, still watching her, still feeling a sense of superiority but also noticing the effect she had on others. He wondered briefly why someone so young and seemingly delicate could have such a presence without even trying. At one point, she walked past his table, carrying a plate with careful hands. She gave him a polite nod, and he nodded back, though his smirk lingered. Inside, he felt a small flicker of something he could not quite identify, a twinge of awareness that perhaps he had misjudged her entirely. But he quickly brushed it aside, dismissing it with a shake of his head. He wanted to believe his assumptions were correct, that she was simply a waitress, nothing more. After completing her tasks, she returned to the area near the piano to check if it needed dusting, or perhaps to glance at the keys once more. She did not sit, only allowed her fingers to hover over the smooth surface briefly, as if reconnecting with an old friend. The man's laugh escaped again, soft but audible to anyone nearby who might have been listening. He did not understand why she would waste her time with a piano when her job required serving food, but to him it was entertaining to imagine her trying to play and failing. He thought of how everyone around them would react if she made a mistake, and he almost smiled at the thought. The other guests did not notice his thoughts, busy with their own meals, yet the tension in the room was subtle, a small anticipation building. The young waitress remained unaware of his gaze, focused on her silent interaction with the piano. She seemed to draw a quiet energy from it, a comfort that no one around her could understand at that moment. The man, however, was intrigued despite himself. He continued to watch her, his amusement mixing with curiosity. He had always believed talent and refinement were obvious in appearance and social status, but something about her movement, her quiet confidence, even in service, suggested that he might be underestimating her. Still, he clung to his pride, telling himself that she was just a waitress, and his laughter was justified. This was a place where appearances mattered, and he felt secure in judging those around him. Yet the more he watched, the more the idea that there might be more to her than he could see began to creep into his mind. He ignored it, focusing instead on the small pleasure of his perceived superiority. As the sun began to lower in the sky, casting longer shadows across the restaurant, she finished her rounds. She returned once more to the piano, standing beside it for a moment before moving on, ready to continue her work. The man took a deep breath, feeling satisfied that his assumptions remained unchallenged, even as a small seed of doubt had been planted. He did not realize it yet, but the day was about to change, and the moment of his laughter would soon turn into something he never expected. The ordinary restaurant, the quiet waitress, and the elegant piano would combine to create a memory that would last far longer than he could imagine. He remained seated, unaware that what he thought was amusement was only the beginning of a story that would humble him completely. And as she moved gracefully between the tables one last time before her break, the man's laughter lingered in the air, a prelude to a moment he would never forget. After finishing her final round of serving, the waitress finally took a brief moment to breathe. The restaurant's hum of conversation and clinking cutlery seemed to fade slightly around her as she approached the piano again. She rested her hands gently on the keys, feeling the familiar coolness beneath her fingers. For her, the piano was a refuge, a place where the world slowed down, where worries and judgments did not matter. She had loved music for as long as she could remember, and even though life had led her to wait tables instead of performing in concert halls, she never allowed that love to fade. The rich man watched her carefully from his corner, still amused by her actions, still confident that nothing remarkable would come of it. He shifted in his seat, placing one elbow on the table and resting his chin in his hand. A few guests noticed his gaze but assumed he was simply observing the room. He, however, could barely look away from her, his smirk fixed but his curiosity now fully engaged. He wondered silently why someone so ordinary in appearance could seem so at ease with such an instrument. It intrigued him even if he would never admit it aloud. Without breaking her calm demeanor, the waitress began to play. Her fingers moved effortlessly across the keys, first in gentle, simple notes, almost like a whisper, testing the space and her own mood. The sound was soft, delicate, and it immediately drew the attention of the surrounding guests. A couple sitting nearby paused mid-conversation, turning slightly to catch a glimpse of her hands. The rich man's amusement shifted slightly. He was no longer just entertained. There was a flicker of surprise that he tried hard to hide. He leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms, telling himself that it was probably just a beginner's skill and that the melody would soon stumble. But as the notes continued, it became impossible to dismiss the music as ordinary. Each movement of her fingers produced harmony and depth far beyond what he expected. She played with confidence, with subtle expression, and every note seemed to tell a story. The room's atmosphere began to change. Conversation softened, guests turned their heads, and a quiet admiration settled over the space. Even the staff paused briefly, watching her with respect that had nothing to do with her role as a waitress. The man could feel the shift, though he tried to mask it. His smirk had faded, replaced by a tension he was unaccustomed to feeling in public. The melody grew richer and more expressive, the waitress lost in the music, unaware of the growing attention she had attracted. Her eyes occasionally glanced down at her hands, ensuring precision, but mostly they were distant, absorbed in the story she was telling through sound. Each note carried a piece of emotion she had accumulated over the years. Frustration, hope, joy, and even a quiet sadness that only made the music more beautiful. The restaurant seemed to hold its breath as she played, the usual ambient noise fading entirely. For a moment, the space felt suspended, almost as if time itself had slowed to let her performance unfold. The rich man's sense of superiority began to crumble. He had come expecting entertainment at the expense of someone he believed was beneath him, and instead, he found himself confronted with undeniable talent. His amusement turned into disbelief, his laughter long gone, replaced by a gnawing unease. He noticed the subtle smiles and soft murmurs of approval from the other guests and realized that his previous judgment had been entirely misplaced. He wanted to look away, to hide from the recognition that he had miscalculated the situation, but his eyes stayed fixed, unable to escape the music that seemed to fill every corner of the room. The waitress, feeling the connection with the instrument, allowed herself to play more freely. She was no longer concerned with the guests or their reactions, only with the melody that flowed from her heart. She had practiced this piece countless times alone in her small apartment, and now, even in a public space, she could perform it naturally. Each chord, each transition, was executed with finesse and emotion. The notes floated through the restaurant, touching each person in different ways. Some felt nostalgia, some felt inspiration, and some, like the rich man, felt the uncomfortable awareness of their own misplaced pride. He watched as her fingers danced across the keys with precision and passion. He had assumed she would falter, that her lack of formal performance experience would be obvious. But she played as though the piano were an extension of herself, each note deliberate, each pause purposeful. The confidence in her hands belied her humble position in the restaurant. The irony was not lost on him. He had thought himself amused by her, and now it was he who felt the discomfort of being judged, silently, by someone he had underestimated. The sound filled the space, and suddenly, he felt exposed, as if his wealth and status mattered very little in the presence of genuine talent. Other diners began to notice and quietly shifted closer, drawn by the music. Some whispered compliments to their companions, praising the beauty and skill in what she was playing. Even those who had initially paid her little attention now found themselves captivated. The richness of her performance contrasted sharply with her modest appearance, and the contrast made it even more compelling. The man could no longer maintain the emotional distance he had tried to preserve. He felt a growing respect, mingled with the sting of humility. He recognized, perhaps for the first time that day, that true skill did not need to be announced or flaunted. It simply existed and revealed itself in quiet, undeniable ways. She continued playing, her eyes now closed, allowing herself to be fully immersed in the music. Her hands moved with such fluidity that it seemed impossible to look away. The audience was silent, caught in the moment, suspended between awe and admiration. The rich man, despite himself, found his body relaxing slightly, the rigid posture he had maintained for appearances softening. There was a strange sense of humility washing over him, a realization that life could surprise him, that assumptions could be entirely wrong, and that respect was something earned, not given based on wealth or position. The piece reached its climax, a combination of powerful chords and gentle, delicate notes that seemed to echo the complexity of human emotion. Each person in the restaurant felt something personal in the music, as though it spoke directly to them. The rich man, usually so composed and confident, felt a rare emotion, mixed with regret. He realized that he had been blind to her abilities, blind to the depth of skill and dedication that could exist in someone who did not flaunt their talent. The sound of the final chord lingered, resonating in the room and leaving a quiet, reflective silence in its wake. The waitress slowly lifted her hands from the keys, breathing softly, and looked around the room for the first time since she began playing. She did not smile triumphantly, nor did she seek acknowledgement. Her expression was calm, composed, and quietly proud. She had shared a part of herself through the music, and it had been received with genuine appreciation. The rich man, now fully aware of his misjudgment, sat frozen for a moment. He could feel the weight of his own arrogance pressing down on him, a stark contrast to the light, effortless way she had commanded the room with nothing but her talent. Guests began clapping softly at first, then louder as the beauty of her performance sank in. Some called out words of praise, and the atmosphere shifted from polite enjoyment to enthusiastic appreciation. The rich man, still seated in his corner, could no longer hide his astonishment. He felt an uncomfortable awareness of how wrong he had been, of how fleeting his smug confidence had been when faced with genuine skill. It was a lesson he had never expected to learn in a restaurant, from someone he had dismissed before she had even begun. The waitress, ever graceful, acknowledged the applause with a small nod. She did not seek to dominate attention, yet the respect she earned was undeniable. The room had changed in those few minutes of music. Patrons who had been quietly chatting were now leaning forward, sharing smiles and whispers about the unexpected talent they had witnessed. The rich man, despite his wealth and experience in the world, had been humbled. He understood, perhaps for the first time in a long time, that life could surprise him in the most unassuming ways. He looked at her one last time before standing to leave, his mind racing with thoughts about pride, judgment, and respect. The waitress returned to her duties, resuming her work with the same quiet grace, leaving an indelible impression on everyone who had been there. Her music had done more than entertain. It had opened eyes, changed perspectives, and reminded those present that talent and brilliance often reside where one least expects to find them. And in that moment, the rich man understood that the laughter he had started with was the first step toward a lesson he would not forget for a long time. The rich man sat back in his chair, his hands clasped tightly in front of him. The applause had faded, replaced by a calm hush, but the feeling of awe lingered. He could not shake the image of the waitress at the piano, her fingers moving with effortless skill, her face calm yet expressive. For someone who had walked into the restaurant with the certainty of superiority, the experience had been humbling. He realized that he had judged her entirely by appearance and position, never imagining the depth of talent she possessed. It was a stark reminder that the world often hid extraordinary abilities in the most ordinary-looking places. The waitress returned to her duties, moving between tables with the same quiet efficiency as before. She wiped down a table here, refilled a water glass there, but now there was a subtle change in how the patrons perceived her. Many of them had seen her play, and their interactions carried newfound respect. Some gave her a small nod, a smile, or a few words of praise. She acknowledged them politely, never boasting or drawing attention to herself. Her demeanor remained humble, even though she had just delivered a performance that had captivated everyone in the room. It was clear that for her, talent was something to share, not something to flaunt. The rich man watched from his corner, his thoughts racing. He could feel the weight of his own arrogance pressing on him. The smirk that had marked the beginning of the afternoon was gone, replaced by a quiet awareness of how wrong he had been. He thought about the laughter that had escaped him when he first saw her near the piano. What he had intended as amusement now felt like embarrassment. He had underestimated someone based solely on their appearance, and the lesson was bitter but necessary. He noticed the small details of her work more clearly now. The way she balanced trays with precision, the way she approached each guest with genuine attention, the way she managed to remain calm and composed even under pressure. Every movement was graceful, not because she was trying to impress, but because she had developed a quiet strength through experience and dedication. Her talent extended beyond music. It was reflected in the way she carried herself and the respect she commanded without demanding it. A few moments later, another guest approached her, asking if she could play a song on the piano. She paused for a brief moment, considering, and then nodded with a soft smile. The rich man's curiosity grew, mixed with a hint of apprehension. He had thought he understood her skill, but now he wondered what else she could do. As she sat at the piano again, he realized that his assumptions had been shallow, failing to grasp the depth of her abilities. She began to play once more, this time choosing a more complex piece. Her fingers moved with precision, each note clear and deliberate. The rich man found himself drawn into the music, unable to focus on anything else. The notes seemed to flow effortlessly from her mind and heart into her hands, creating a melody that was both powerful and gentle. The sound was rich and full, capturing the attention of everyone in the restaurant. Guests stopped talking, their meals momentarily forgotten, as they listened with rapt attention. The man felt a mixture of admiration and discomfort. He had come expecting entertainment at her expense, and instead, he had been confronted with undeniable excellence as she played. He observed her expressions, the subtle arch of an eyebrow, the way her lips moved slightly as if whispering along with the music, the gentle tilt of her head. Each movement seemed to convey emotion, telling a story beyond the notes themselves. He realized that this was more than just technical skill. It was artistry, a deep connection between the performer and the music. The rich man felt an unfamiliar sensation. Humility. It was not just a lesson in talent, but in character. Here was someone who had lived a life that required resilience, someone who had worked hard and carried herself with dignity, and he had dismissed her before even knowing her story. The piece built to a crescendo, the music swelling and filling every corner of the restaurant. The rich man leaned forward slightly, captivated, aware that he was witnessing something rare and extraordinary. The sound carried with it a sense of purpose and authenticity, a reminder that true talent did not need validation or praise to exist. It simply existed, and those who recognized it were fortunate to experience it. He felt a pang of regret for his earlier laughter, understanding how misplaced it had been. When the final notes faded, there was a moment of silence. The waitress lifted her hands slowly from the keys, breathing gently, as if the act of playing had been both a gift and a release. The room erupted in applause, louder and more heartfelt than before. People cheered, clapped, and called out words of admiration. The rich man sat frozen, the weight of the moment settling on him. He could feel the sting of his earlier assumptions, but he also felt a strange gratitude. He had witnessed something beautiful and unexpected, and it had changed his perspective. The waitress acknowledged the applause with a quiet nod, her expression serene. She did not boast, she did not seek recognition, but her calm dignity made the admiration inevitable. She returned to her duties with ease, as if nothing extraordinary had happened, yet the atmosphere in the restaurant had shifted. Guests looked at her with newfound respect, the ordinary appearance of a waitress now intertwined with the extraordinary reality of her talent. The rich man remained in his seat, reflecting on the events. He realized that his wealth and status could not grant him the insight to recognize true skill and character. He had been humbled, and the lesson was unforgettable. For the first time that day, he understood that life had a way of teaching lessons in the most unexpected places. The waitress had reminded him that talent, dedication, and grace could exist anywhere, and that it was arrogance and assumption that often blinded people to it. He watched her continue her work, noticing the way she interacted with other staff members, the subtle gestures that revealed her kindness and patience. Her presence seemed to elevate the energy of the restaurant, making it feel warmer and more welcoming. The rich man felt a mixture of admiration and self-reflection. He realized that he had arrived expecting to feel superior, to observe, to judge, but instead he had been observed and judged in the quietest, most effective way, through the undeniable evidence of her talent and character. As the afternoon slowly turned into evening, the restaurant began to fill with more guests. The waitress continued her tasks, moving efficiently and gracefully, yet the memory of her music lingered in the minds of everyone who had heard it. The rich man knew that he would not forget this moment anytime soon. It had been a rare lesson, one that combined humility, beauty, and the quiet power of talent unrecognized until revealed. He stood at last, preparing to leave, but he could not help but glance once more at the waitress. She was busy attending to another table, unaware of the lasting impact she had made on him. He understood that this experience had changed something within him, a subtle shift in perspective that could not be undone. He walked out of the restaurant with a mix of embarrassment, respect, and awe, carrying a lesson that he had never expected to learn from someone he had initially dismissed. The waitress continued her work, her presence calm and steady, as if nothing had happened, yet the echoes of her music had touched everyone around her. The rich man's laughter from earlier felt like a distant memory, replaced entirely by reflection and the realization that assumptions based on appearances were often wrong. The restaurant had returned to its normal rhythm, but the memory of the performance and the lesson it brought would linger in the minds of all who witnessed it. In that moment, the ordinary had transformed into the extraordinary, and the rich man had experienced firsthand the humility that comes from recognizing talent, dedication, and grace in a place where he least expected it. The rich man stayed in the corner of the restaurant longer than he had intended. He found himself watching the waitress work, noticing things he had never paid attention to before. The way she balanced trays with care, how she smiled at the guests without appearing forced, and the effortless grace in her movements made him feel out of place. He realized that he had underestimated her in every possible way. He had come in thinking she was just a server, a simple presence in the background of the elegant restaurant, someone whose life was likely ordinary and predictable. But now he understood that life was rarely so simple, and that people often held surprises hidden behind ordinary appearances. The waitress moved among the tables, refilling water glasses, clearing plates, and asking gently if anyone needed anything else. She did all this with a sense of calm that seemed natural and effortless. Guests responded warmly, clearly enjoying her attention, and she offered each of them a quiet kindness that felt genuine. It was not just her musical talent that impressed him. It was the combination of skill, patience, and character that shone through in every action she took. He realized that her music was only one expression of her depth, and the more he watched, the more he felt humbled. At one table, a child spilled a cup of juice, and the waitress was immediately there with a soft smile, cleaning it up quickly and making the child laugh to ease the embarrassment. The rich man noticed how natural her care was, how there was no sign of irritation or forced patience. He reflected on his own behavior, how he had laughed at her without understanding, and he felt a sharp twinge of shame. He had judged her without thought, but she had handled every moment with grace and respect. It was a lesson he had never expected to learn in a restaurant, yet here he was, learning it in real time. As she moved back toward the piano, he felt a strange anticipation. Part of him wanted to leave, to escape the discomfort of realizing how wrong he had been, but another part of him was drawn to the possibility that she might play again. The subtle hope that her talent would continue to surprise him made him lean forward slightly, his earlier pride giving way to curiosity. He observed her hands lightly brush over the keys, her touch gentle and deliberate. It was a simple gesture, but it carried weight, suggesting a connection between her and the instrument that went beyond casual skill. He could sense her confidence, her comfort, and the quiet joy she seemed to derive from the piano. It made him reflect on his own life, how often he had dismissed or underestimated others based on superficial impressions. She began to play once more, selecting a piece that was different from her first performance. This one had more complexity, with a mixture of soft melodies and strong, expressive chords. Her fingers moved across the keys with precision, each note resonating clearly. The rich man watched, completely captivated, as the music filled the room and touched every person present. The guests quieted, listening intently, some closing their eyes to better feel the sound. The rich man realized that his expectations had been completely wrong. He had come expecting amusement at her expense, yet he found himself immersed in the beauty of her performance, struggling to reconcile his earlier arrogance with the reality before him. The piece carried emotion in every note, revealing a story he could not fully understand but could feel deeply. He noticed the subtle shifts in her expression, the way she leaned into the music, and the way her body moved naturally with the rhythm. It was clear that she was not just playing notes but expressing something personal, a part of herself that few people would ever see. The rich man felt a mixture of awe and humility. He had assumed that wealth and status were indicators of power and authority, but in this moment, he realized that true strength lay in talent, dedication, and character, qualities that could not be measured by money or appearance. The restaurant was completely engaged. Every eye turned toward her, every ear listening intently. The staff, who had initially been busy with their duties, paused briefly, captivated by the performance. Even the chef in the kitchen, visible through a small window, peeked out to see the woman whose music had captured the entire room. The rich man felt a growing sense of embarrassment, realizing that his earlier laughter was not only misplaced but also inappropriate. He had assumed superiority, yet here he was, humbled by the undeniable evidence of her skill and the grace with which she carried herself as the music reached its climax. The rich man felt a strange shift within himself. He understood that the lesson was not only about talent but also about perspective. He had allowed arrogance to cloud his judgment, assuming that appearances defined worth. But the waitress had shown, without words, that true value comes from dedication, humility, and the ability to share one's gifts without expecting recognition. He realized that he had been blind, and the realization was uncomfortable, yet necessary. He had been given a rare opportunity to witness authenticity and excellence in a form he had not anticipated, and it had left a lasting impact on him. The final notes of the piece echoed through the restaurant, lingering in the air like a gentle reminder of the moment. There was a brief silence, and then the room erupted in applause, heartfelt and enthusiastic. Guests cheered and clapped, some calling out words of praise. The waitress rose from the piano slowly, acknowledging the applause with a modest nod, her expression calm and unassuming. She did not boast, did not demand recognition, but the respect and admiration were evident in the eyes of everyone present. The rich man sat quietly, processing the experience, feeling the weight of his own misjudgment and the humility it had brought him. As the applause subsided, the waitress returned to her work, moving seamlessly among the tables with the same calm efficiency she had shown before. The rich man noticed how effortlessly she shifted from performing to serving, her demeanor unchanged, her grace intact. He reflected on the contrast between her ordinary appearance and extraordinary talent, understanding that true brilliance often exists where it is least expected. He had learned, in a few short moments, that assumptions could be misleading and that respect must be earned through observation, understanding, and humility. The man realized that the lesson extended beyond the restaurant, beyond this moment, into how he viewed the world and the people in it. He had often judged others based on superficial markers, assuming that wealth, status, or outward appearance defined ability and character. Yet here was someone who had defied those assumptions, revealing depth, skill, and grace that could not be quantified or predicted. He felt a quiet determination to change his perspective, to approach people with more openness and curiosity rather than judgment. The waitress had unknowingly become his teacher, demonstrating the power of talent, dedication, and humility in the most unassuming way. He observed her interactions with the staff and the guests, noticing the subtle kindnesses she performed without expectation of reward or praise. A gentle word here, a small gesture there, each one reflecting a thoughtful and considerate nature. The rich man realized that her true gift extended beyond music. It was in the way she treated others, the quiet confidence she carried, and the authenticity that permeated every action. He felt a mixture of admiration, respect, and regret for his earlier assumptions. The laughter he had offered at the start of the afternoon seemed distant, almost foolish, compared to the depth of understanding he had gained. The waitress continued to move gracefully, attending to her responsibilities while carrying herself with dignity and composure. The rich man felt a growing awareness that the world often held surprises hidden beneath ordinary surfaces. He had been reminded that appearances could deceive, that true talent and character were not always obvious, and that humility was an essential part of recognizing and respecting the abilities of others. He understood, in a profound way, that the moments of insight and learning often came from unexpected places and people, and that openness to such experiences was a mark of wisdom. As the evening drew near and the sunlight faded, the restaurant began to settle into a quieter rhythm. The guests who had witnessed the performance lingered in conversation, still discussing the unexpected display of talent. The rich man remained in his seat, reflecting on the transformation he had experienced over the course of the afternoon. He understood that the waitress's influence extended beyond her music. It had reshaped his perspective, challenged his pride, and left a lasting impression. He had arrived expecting amusement, judgment, and superiority, but he had been given something far more valuable: insight, humility, and respect. The waitress, unaware of the full extent of her impact, continued her work with quiet grace. She did not seek attention or acknowledgement, yet her presence had changed the atmosphere of the restaurant and the perspectives of those who had observed her. The rich man realized that moments like these were rare and precious, a reminder that life's most important lessons often came in unexpected forms and from unexpected people. As he prepared to leave, he understood that he would carry this experience with him, a lasting reminder that talent, character, and humility were far more important than wealth or status. And in that moment, he felt a deep sense of respect for the waitress, for her abilities, her composure, and the quiet power she had wielded without even realizing it. As the evening settled over the restaurant, the rich man realized he had spent more time observing the waitress than he had intended. He had come expecting entertainment at her expense, but what he had experienced was far richer and more meaningful. Her talent had not only captivated everyone present but had also served as a mirror, reflecting his own pride and the shallow assumptions he had carried. He understood now that true skill and character could never be measured by wealth or status, and that every person, no matter their position, had depths that were often hidden from the casual observer. The waitress continued her duties with quiet focus, moving among the tables with the same grace and care she had shown all afternoon. Each gesture, each word she offered to the guests, carried warmth and authenticity. She did not seek recognition, yet the impact she had on the room was undeniable. The rich man watched her, feeling a growing respect that went beyond mere admiration for her musical talent. He recognized the strength it took to remain composed, to work diligently, and to carry oneself with dignity despite the challenges of life. It was a lesson in humility, patience, and grace, one that he would not forget. He decided, somewhat hesitantly, to approach her. His steps were careful, his mind racing with the right words, though he knew that no apology could fully convey the depth of his earlier misjudgment. When he reached her, she looked up, her expression calm and attentive. He felt a moment of nervousness, a rare emotion for someone accustomed to commanding attention through wealth and presence alone. He cleared his throat, realizing that the most important thing was sincerity. He offered a quiet, genuine apology for his earlier amusement, for underestimating her abilities and for the arrogance he had displayed. She listened with a soft, understanding expression, nodding gently. There was no resentment, no bitterness, only the calm acknowledgement of his words. It struck him that her composure and generosity of spirit were as remarkable as her musical talent. They spoke briefly, and he learned that she had been playing the piano since childhood, that music had always been a source of joy and solace in her life. Circumstances had led her to work as a waitress, yet she had never abandoned her passion. Her dedication and resilience impressed him even more than the performance itself. He found himself reflecting on how often life circumstances mask true talent, and how easy it was for people to be judged incorrectly based on appearances. The waitress, in her quiet way, had reminded him of a truth he had long overlooked, that genuine skill and character could exist in anyone, and that respect must be earned through observation and understanding. As he returned to his table, he felt a subtle but profound change within himself. The arrogance he had carried in the beginning of the day had been replaced with humility and appreciation. He realized that he had been given a rare and valuable lesson, one that extended far beyond the walls of the restaurant. It was a reminder that the world was full of surprises, that people often possessed hidden depths, and that every interaction had the potential to teach something important. He resolved to carry this awareness with him, to approach others with greater openness and curiosity, and to recognize that wealth and status were not measures of true worth. The restaurant began to quiet as the evening progressed. Guests finished their meals, some leaving quietly, others pausing to compliment the waitress and thank her for the memorable experience. The atmosphere was warm, reflective, and full of a shared appreciation for the unexpected beauty that had unfolded. The rich man observed the interactions around him, noting how the waitress's presence had subtly transformed the energy of the room. It was not only her music but also her demeanor, her kindness, and her composure that had left an impact. He understood that true influence did not always require authority or prominence. Sometimes it came from quiet strength, skill, and the willingness to give one's best without expectation. As she returned to her station near the piano, he watched her for a moment longer. Her calm composure and the effortless way she balanced her responsibilities with grace were inspiring. He thought about the lessons he had learned that day, that assumptions could be misleading, that talent could be hidden beneath ordinary appearances, and that humility and respect were essential in recognizing the value in others. He realized that he had not only witnessed an extraordinary performance but had also experienced personal growth. The moment had changed the way he viewed people, reminding him to look beyond the surface and to appreciate the unseen efforts and abilities of those around him. The rich man decided to leave, but not before expressing his gratitude once more. He approached her gently, offering a word of thanks for the music, for the lesson, and for the reminder of the importance of humility. She acknowledged him with a quiet smile, her expression serene and kind. There was no need for further words. The respect and understanding between them were evident. As he stepped out into the evening, he felt lighter, more aware, and profoundly moved by the experience. He realized that he had been given a gift far greater than any meal or setting in the restaurant. The gift of insight, humility, and the reminder that extraordinary talent often resides where it is least expected. Outside, the city was alive with its usual evening bustle, yet the rich man felt a quiet sense of reflection and clarity. He thought about the ordinary waitress who had transformed the atmosphere of the restaurant with her music and her character. He understood that life often provided lessons in unexpected places, and that the people around us could be sources of profound learning and inspiration. He walked with a new awareness, carrying the memory of the piano, the music, and the grace of the woman who had played it, realizing that it had forever changed his perspective. Back in the restaurant, the waitress continued her work with steady composure. She cleaned tables, refilled drinks, and attended to guests with a gentle patience that never wavered. The applause of earlier lingered in the room, not as a performance to be boasted about, but as a quiet acknowledgement of the beauty she had shared. Guests who had witnessed her playing exchanged smiles and words of admiration, yet the waitress herself remained humble, focused, and kind. She had shared a part of herself without expectation, and the impact of that sharing was felt by all who had observed it. The rich man's presence, his earlier laughter, and his eventual humility were now part of a larger story, one that had left a lasting impression on both him and the environment he had entered. The evening progressed, and the restaurant slowly emptied. The waitress tidied her station and prepared for the quieter hours ahead. She reflected briefly on the day, her experiences, and the small moments that had defined it. She did not seek recognition or validation, yet the respect she had earned and the lessons she had imparted through her actions and her music were undeniable. She understood that true influence often came without announcement, and that the quiet dignity of one's work and passion could touch lives in ways that words could never capture. The rich man's journey that day had begun with laughter, expectation, and superiority, but it ended with reflection, respect, and humility. He had witnessed a performance that transcended music, one that conveyed character, resilience, and grace. He had learned that talent and true worth could exist where it was least expected and that humility and observation were necessary to recognize it. The waitress had unknowingly transformed not only the atmosphere of the restaurant but also the perspective of a man who had thought himself above judgment. In the quiet, ordinary space of a restaurant, extraordinary lessons had been shared, and both the audience and the performer were changed forever. As the night settled in and the last guests departed, the restaurant returned to its calm state. The waitress cleaned up quietly, her demeanor unchanged, her talent unassuming yet impactful. The rich man, reflecting on the day's events, left with a deeper understanding of life, human character, and the lessons that come from unexpected encounters. The story of that afternoon, of music, humility, and grace, would stay with him, a reminder that the ordinary can often hold the extraordinary, and that every interaction carries the potential for insight, respect, and transformation.